Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Under Center podcast. I'm your host, Darren Maher, and today we are going to talk about the life of Jim Duncan. Jim was a cornerback and kickoff returner for the Baltimore Colts for the majority of his career. He was part of the Colts team that won Super Bowl V in 1971 against the Dallas Cowboys. The Super Bowl, though, was the height of his career because teams seemed to go downhill as soon as that game ended. On the show today to talk about Jim Duncan's life and his mysterious death while in a police station is Bret McCormick. Bret is the creator of Return Man. It's an 8-part podcast documentary series that looks at Jim's life. Bret, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Dara. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Just before we get into the show, guys, if you are watching us on YouTube, can you please like this video and subscribe to the Dynamo Podcast Network? It'll really help us out and it will help grow the followership and help Irish podcasts too. So first things first on the podcast, Bret, what made you want to look into the life of Jim Duncan?
Yeah, so I stumbled upon his story while there was a restaurant in the area that I was working in that like where I was working, it's called Rock Hill, South Carolina. It's near Charlotte is the big city. And it's known for producing NFL players. Like it's a small town, but has like an outsized presence in the NFL. And there was a local restaurant owner that was trying to make like kind of like a shrine, so to speak, to these NFL players, you know, like with their jerseys and stuff. And he was checking with me, wanted to make sure he had the right list, you know, that he had everybody. So I was double checking for him. I thought I knew everybody, but I was just, you know, double checking to make sure we didn't offend somebody by leaving them off the wall. And I went through this website. You probably know it, profootballreference.com. It's a great website. And so I was looking for players from the state of South Carolina. I was going down this list and it was chronologically ordered. And I saw Jim Duncan from Lancaster, South Carolina, which was in our coverage area. He wasn't one I was like familiar with. And then it also had the age, like their lifespan or something like that. And, you know, it said like 1946 to 72. And that like caught my eye. Okay, it's like pretty young when he died. So I just Googled his name. And his Wikipedia page came up. And if you look at like, at that point, I haven't looked at it in a while, actually, I should check it out. But, you know, it was kind of just a description of his football career. And then a really innocuous last sentence that said he died in the police station of his hometown with, you know, had fatally shot himself with a police officer's revolver, you know, which really made the, I don't know if the hair on the back of my neck stood up, but it like, you know, my antenna were up. And so that kind of like started it all. I started looking for his family to see if he had family in the area still. I found some of them. And then his brother was interested in at least talking to me. And so from there, it just sort of took off. And that was in March 2017 was the first time I talked to Elroy, Jim Duncan's younger brother, in person. And Elroy lives in Charlotte, which is where I live. And that kind of started this 4-year process, nearly 4-year process of doing this project.
Yeah, and Jim, like you're saying, was born in Lancaster, South Carolina in 1946 to a single mother. He was the oldest of 7, I believe. He was a player, actually played all sides of the ball early in his career. He actually played offense as well as defense and special teams. I think he was a quarterback for a while, but he sort of, when he realized he had the pace to get away from defenders, I think he started to be returned. And his brother actually one of his brothers ended up being a quarterback himself as well. That you mentioned in one of the early episodes. Goes to Maryland Eastern Shore College and is drafted in the 4th round by the Baltimore Colts. The odd thing, though, that modern football fans may not know about this in the year that he was drafted, there was 17 rounds in that draft.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, it was like an era when pro sports was not as pro, you know, so they say, you know, so they're drafting a lot of guys that like almost instantly are falling through, like they just realize they got a job at a bank that's like, a better job or whatever. So also the rosters were something like 40 players at that time. So it's weird that they had actually less roster spots and, like what, 60 something percent more rounds or something. Not my math's probably terrible there, but that was, I don't know, to be drafted in the 4th round out of 17 was pretty good. I mean, the school that he went to had produced a lot of NFL players, like guys that I think nowadays would have gone to, like the SEC, like big Southern schools that at that time didn't take Black football players. So they all ended up at Maryland State College, which is now Maryland Eastern Shore, and they actually don't even have a football team anymore. So it was like a pretty unique time in like college and pro football history. I mean, I think that Maryland State College was sort of like a sanctuary for them, kind of a safer place in a country that was really going through a lot of upheaval. And even Maryland's Eastern Shore is really rural and like a lot like the American South, and not always the friendliest to Black people. So even there, it was, I think their college and their football program was sort of like a refuge for them.
Yeah, and obviously at a time where there was segregation in terms of schooling too, and this was obviously an all-Black college, like you're saying, they had the comfort of going to a place where I guess you could say that they knew they were going to be accepted.
Yeah, and like mostly safe. I mean, like there could always be something really excessive happen, but yeah, generally like accepted and just kind of allowed to be, which I mean, there was one guy I talked to, and he was in the podcast, Jeff Beaver, who played football at University of North Carolina, and he said that when he played with Jim Duncan on the Harrisburg Capital Colts, the minor league team for the Baltimore Colts, that was the first time he had played with Black players. And so he came from UNC, which is a big school in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So I thought that was interesting, and it was like he had fond memories of that experience because it was, like eye-opening for him, or I don't know about eye-opening, but like it kind of expanded his horizons to interact with Black people in a normal way instead of something so fraught like it would have normally been, like Remember the Titans or something like that.
Yeah, and it mentioned as well that they would actually play games on the white players' field as well, too. So there was sort of, when it came to football, especially, and when it came to sports, there was a little more sort of leeway given.
Yeah, you definitely see that too with the Colts when he gets in the NFL. Because when Jim arrives at the Colts in 1968, I mean, Baltimore, that's one of the worst years in Baltimore's history. I mean, they had huge riots that stemmed from the Martin Luther King assassination, literally huge chunks of the city that were burned down. And he just shows up in the middle of that. And but like the Colts, but if you were a Baltimore Colt, like you were good, with anybody. I mean, people would buy you beers and stuff. And so it is, I think it is informative to how white America has accepted Black people that, entertain them or play sports. There's, as long as they don't, get out of line or kneel for an anthem or something like that. I mean, that's really been, it's been that way for a long time, that people could stomach other people that they didn't, normally like, as long as they were averaging 35 yards a kick return.
Yeah, and like you said, after being drafted by the Colts in '68, he started out with the Capital Colts. So I guess it's maybe the equivalent of the practice squad that we see nowadays, although it did include semi-professional and professional players at the time.
Yeah, there's really not a great equivalent for it right now, because I mean, you had a full team. So the Capital Colts really only had like 5 or 6 guys that had any kind of remote future with Baltimore Colts. I mean, everybody else was pretty much to make up the numbers. So we don't really have an equivalent of it today. I've always kind of wondered, like, if the XFL or some other league would sort of serve as that minor league for the NFL. But I think it's I think like new football leagues are kind of hesitant to be subservient to the NFL, like right out of the gate, even though in the long run that would be a smarter business plan. Um, because there's a lot of NFL players that don't make it, or a lot of college football players that just don't make it, and because there's not enough spots. So, um, but these guys they played with, I mean, all had day jobs and you know uh, worked 9 to 5, and then they maybe practice like once or twice a week. Because the 5 or 6 I mentioned would practice with the Baltimore Colts during the week, and then they would go down with that team on the weekend. So, nobody was making any money off of it really, but it was good reps for Jim Duncan, especially because when he was there, he was tearing it up. Based on what I found in their newspaper. So he was, ran some kicks back and was getting a lot of playing time, which he wouldn't have gotten with the Baltimore Colts, because at that point they had a really experienced defensive secondary, and so there just wasn't going to be any run for him. And again, remember, he was basically switching from quarterback to the defensive secondary, which is not a position he had played all that much before the NFL. But that's again, there's a lot of racial components to the story, and there just weren't black quarterbacks at that time. So really, black quarterbacks almost always got switched to another position. You still see some of that these days when somebody thinks a black quarterback isn't going to make it at QB, he can just switch to wide receiver or whatever because he's probably athletic enough. So I mean that idea persists, but it was really almost gospel at that point in time. It just didn't happen. So that was good for him because he was learning a new position and got a lot of reps to be able to do that.
Yeah, and the way you describe him there as well, and from the episodes that I listened to as well, that he mentioned, you mentioned that he was fairly snappy dresser. He was quite fashion conscious. He had he was the one with the Puma boots with the white trim on them. He had the flashy cars. He sort of in my head compared him to a modern day player that actually spent a good chunk of his time in Carolina as well, and that would have probably been Cam Newton.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but it could be. Yeah, especially, no, I think like, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, especially like you just said, that he was a quarterback beforehand, and he might play. So if he was playing nowadays, he probably would have continued to be a quarterback who was quite mobile, who could run, who held the ball like he had shovel hands to hold the ball like Cam does nowadays.
Yeah, that wags the ball around a lot when he runs, and you think of all those touchdowns that Cam Newton scored when he's put the ball out into space, but it's never touched down or anything. It could have been. I think like one of the like real overarching aspects of him was like you mentioned, came from a family with a single mother, and he was the oldest of this like massive siblings, and I think that he really relished having more money than he knew what to do with, and not like he was rich or anything. I mean, he wasn't making like crazy money, but it was just he like probably for the first time in his life was not wanting really for anything. And so I think there was like a zest for life or whatever, and fashion was definitely something he was interested in, and looking good. And it's hard to say what like a poor upbringing does for your psychology. Like people react to that very differently, but I think for him it was to embrace and enjoy what he finally could. And there's a lot of other evidence of that, as you know if you listen to the podcast, as far as being what we would probably consider kind of wasteful when he went out to eat, but this is because he could, and for the first time in his life he wasn't having to think about it.
Yeah, there's definitely some stories in the podcast about what he did when he had money as well, which were very good. And I'll leave people to listen to the podcast to find out those stories, because it's definitely worth listening to sort of how he would spend his money. But let's talk about the 1970-71 season. it was actually that year the Colts were under new management as well, because the coach that drafted Jim had gone. Jim Ursa had gone to Miami. So it was rookie head coach Don McCaffrey who took over that year, and they were obviously trying to avenge the Super Bowl loss they had a couple of years previous to the Jets, where it was a real surprise. Obviously, Jets led by Joe Namath at that time. So they make it to Miami and the Super Bowl, where of course they face the Cowboys, like I mentioned at the start, and sort of they lose their veteran quarterback Johnny Unitas there. I think it was a rib injury or a punctured lung as well. I know I watched some of the video of the game back, and it was a pretty stiff shot he took to the ribs for sure. But they battled back, and Duncan himself actually in 4 returns had 90 yards in the game, including a fumble as well, I should say, too. He had a pretty bad fumble there as well at one point in the game too. But, it was such a big moment for the Colts to avenge that Super Bowl loss to the Jets by winning this one.
Yeah, it was a weird game. It was like one of the worst Super Bowls ever. I think there was like 11 combined turnovers or something like that. And just really sloppy. It was the first game ever played on AstroTurf. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but the first game you're going to play on a surface where the ball bounces a lot, and the ball was bouncing a lot. I think one description in the podcast initially, we had Duncan like described as a Super Bowl hero, and then we thought we should maybe like dial that back, because I don't know that he was the hero. I mean, he played okay. He started, and he actually did a good job on. He was covering Bob Hayes, who's all-time great wide receiver from the Cowboys, and who did nothing in that game, as most other people did nothing.
He did one thing. Sorry to interrupt there. He did one thing. He tipped the ball away from Duncan, giving him a chance to intercept it before it was intercepted. Because I remember
you did your homework, Daryl.
Yeah. He was all set to intercept that ball, but it was tipped away from him by the wide receiver.
Yeah, and then even the touchdown that John Mackey scored, was also tipped. I mean, the whole game was just a kind of a sloppy mess. But no, and then Duncan was credited with the key fumble recovery as Cowboys were about to score late in the game. Although you've seen the video and probably read about it, I mean, it really didn't look like he even got near the ball.
No.
But they gave it to him. So, that's where we were like, is he the hero, or is he just, we'll go with he played a big role. So that was a safer way to put it.
Definitely played a big role. And just from watching the game, man, I encourage people to actually have a look at it, just to see. If you've never seen Jim Duncan play, just watch, because you look at him when he gets the ball, you think he's about a foot taller than every other player. The speed alone from him as well on that field too. He if you can watch other games as well, when he can break off away from a couple of tackles, you won't catch him. He's like a taller Tyreek Hill, you could probably guess, with his speed. You're not going to catch him at all. But it, like you were saying, it's such a strange game, and I kind of, in researching for this, I watched the NFL do their like America's game for each Super Bowl, and they talked about this one. And what I got from every Colts player who was interviewed for that was they didn't feel like it was a win, because they were still hung up on the Jets' loss.
Yeah, and they played so badly. Apparently, I thought that was interesting. I thought that was like a weird vibe, because so I mean, for people who don't know, in '68, Joe Namath, made this like big claim that the Jets, who were like enormous underdogs, that Colts team, had like a really tremendous defense and were huge favorites in the Super Bowl, and they just laid an egg. They just like played terribly and lost to the Jets. And it was
actually a game. Sorry to interrupt. It was actually a game also that Johnny Unitas left early in too.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Earl Morrall both times was the guy that came in, but no, I think because they played so badly that it just didn't feel like they had really avenged that defeat. But I mean, I thought they were being hard on themselves, because I mean, if you win, you win. I mean, it was an ugly game, but like they still got the ring, and they still won. But I don't know, maybe they held themselves to some sort of higher standard or something. I I would have loved to have known what Jim Duncan felt about it, because I never really saw his reaction to it.
Yeah.
I could promise you that, guys like him that were not on that 68 team. I mean, he was on that team, but he didn't play in the game, probably were excited to win the Super Bowl regardless.
Yeah, definitely. And especially for him, it would have been his first Super Bowl. Like, you probably couldn't say that he was that, like, if you want to say, because he couldn't count that game against the Jets, because he would have been, it was only the year he was drafted. So you could just say that, look, listen, I was a rookie, we'll let it go. But I saw, like, I purposely sort of looked out to see, especially for the kick that won the game, and just to see the reaction. And it was sort of a strange reaction. Like, he sort of ran over to the other players celebrating, but it looked as if he felt like he had to, if you know what I mean. I don't know if he was overly excited himself.
Who knows? I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard to get the vibe there, like maybe it was more like relief or something. I'm
Possibly.
not really
Yeah.
sure. That was no, you're right. It was kind of a weird thing, and like you got Unitas over there, could probably like barely breathe. And I don't know. Yeah, it was a weird vibe. I wouldn't really be able to say, I guess, what they were thinking after that, especially
It,
Jim Duncan. A lot of people never knew what he was thinking.
yeah, and it just shows the advances in modern medicine as well, that for the whole game, or the whole second half that Johnny Unitas was out, he just had an ice pack under his rib for the whole thing. It could have been broken, it could have been a punctured lung, but no, he was sitting there with an ice pack for the rest of the game and just watching the rest of it, for sure. No hospital, no medical treatment.
No, there are some horror stories that were shared with me, in working on this thing. I mean, like, Rick Volk told me a really bad one. He was a safety. He played on the side of the field that Duncan played on, so like they were, interacted a lot during the game, kind of telling each other where to be and stuff. And it was in that Super Bowl that they lost to the Jets, where they scored late and they were trying to onside kick to try to get the ball back, time running down, and he just got like crushed in the head, as the ball came like right to him, and he kind of like ducked down and he just got pounded, and he was out cold, and two guys came out and like basically like dragged him off the field, and they got the game underway, because like I guess they weren't really waiting around for him to
Yeah.
come off the field. But he told me that he never had any he didn't think he really had any long-term effects from it, because it was the last game of the season, and then he had like 4 or 5 months where he didn't do anything. So I think he was able to have like some natural recovery time, whereas if there had been another game or two or whatever after it, that it could have really caused issues for him, I feel like.
Yeah, and that at that time, obviously, there was no sort of really like
Right.
head injury assessments. Like, if you were
Right.
fine the next game, you were good. And in the podcast, players mentioned too that they had actually maybe got concussed, played the next play, and they're seeing 2 footballs being thrown at a time. So it's just, I think it was definitely the way it was, the way the game was played at that time. But moving on then from the Super Bowl, like I mentioned at the start, as soon as the final whistle goes, it seems as though his career kind of goes in a tailspin. At the start of the 71-72 season, he gets injured in preseason and he sort of never really recovers from that. He's then traded to the Saints and was waived before the start of the season. Then was given a trial by the Dolphins, and was subsequently then waived a couple of days after that too. Then the sort of personal trauma starts to come to light there a little bit. Drugs start become an issue. I think it was mentioned that marijuana and heroin were definitely the 2 drugs that people thought that Jim used the most.
Yeah. So I would say, like, I would back up a little bit. So right after the Super Bowl, they went to the Bahamas. The team owner paid for a trip for them. And I was trying to find out more information about that trip, because I could picture that would have been really the apex for him, sitting on the beach, $15,000 Super Bowl victory bonus, which was equal to his year's salary. And, just chilling on the beach, having drinks and soaking it up. And at that point, from there, you could see where it goes downhill. So it sounds like he started to get into heroin somehow in the summer of 71. It's not entirely clear, and I had one person that confirmed that, and that a bunch of other people that thought it and like had a suspicion about it. So I felt, pretty strongly that he was, but it would have been better to have more sources for sure. I would have felt better about it, but I think it was definitely a problem for him. It's possible that he got into it through like painkillers or something like that. I mean, one former player told me that their team trainers and team doctors have like a fishing tackle box, full of like each little section with a different color pill, and basically you could grab whatever you wanted. So there was this was a couple years before the NFL started drug testing. That was like the mid 70s. So this just was a very different climate. Again, when you talk about concussions, this was the same thing. It was just not really something they worried about. I mean, at that point, football players were really kind of just used, so to speak. I mean, they were there to produce, and whatever it took to do that is what happened. So it's possible that happened, or, even that he just was willing to try stuff and, being a recreational drug user, he definitely smoked weed, that, he tried other things and maybe got, in a little bit too deep. So that 71 season was pretty much a wash. It's hard to say if that was heroin related completely or what. I mean, there were a lot of other things that were going on at the same time. And like that, those injuries in the preseason, if you think about, you're coming off a Superbowl season, and he himself had a year that really had established himself as like a future, probably decently long-term NFL starter. The last thing you want to have happen in next preseason is you injure your ankle and you miss the whole start of the year. So it just never, that really was metaphoric, and they just never got right after that. Then after that season, which was a dud, and kind of a dud for the team too, they sort of underachieved a little bit, I think. They got a new general manager, and when he came in, there was a picture of him with a broom, and he basically was cleaning house. So the Colts had gotten a little bit old. Duncan didn't really fit that, description. I think he was like 25 at the time, but he ended up getting traded to New Orleans, and there's a lot of it's not clear why he got traded, because if they're trying to kind of have like a youth movement, get rid of Johnny Unitas and people like that, but it makes sense because they're older. He wasn't older, so there had to be something else there that they didn't feel like they could trust him, or he wasn't performing or whatever. It's hard to say what they knew, because it's not very clear. And so he ended up getting traded to New Orleans, and by that point, that was the spring of 72, and I would say things were not going very well for him. He was back in Lancaster, and it's not really clear if he was using drugs there. Well, I'm sure he was smoking weed, but not harder drugs. Also seemed to like really be unsure if he wanted to keep playing, and this is where the head injury stuff really comes into play, and seems to become more of a factor too, because his personality and his behavior kind of become inconsistent with what it had been previously. So he starts acting weirdly. You could also say maybe drugs, but it makes sense based on some of the stories I was told that other things were involved besides just drugs. And so the Saints actually sent their coaches up to Lancaster to feel him out, see like kind of where his head was at. And they gave him an advance on his I think it was an advance on a bonus he would get if he like led the league in kickoff return yardage or something like that. And so that sort of speaks to, he was having some money trouble at the time too. So like all this stuff was just coming to a head. Really a confluence of events that would be difficult for, I think, anybody to deal with, especially somebody that was in his situation. So so he went to the Saints training camp, and again he got wasn't in great shape. He got injured again, and then things just fell apart, and he wound up back in Lancaster in the September of 1972, and that ultimately was the worst thing that could have ever happened to him.
Yeah. Do we know though, in your research, do you have any sort of injuries before the ankle, after the Super Bowl, that obviously you get the odd injury that happened, but anything sort of severe? Because yeah, like you're saying, it's sort of when that happens is when things start to go a little downhill. Now, it could have been like you're saying the Bahamas trip, but that sort of sense when you're 24, 25, 26, and you get your first serious injury, and then you realize you're human. Maybe that could happen, and he just didn't react well to it, possibly.
I don't know. So another thing was they didn't have they didn't publish injury reports. So when I was trying to find those when I was looking for like games that he would have been held out to see if there was something to explain. And actually, I wasn't looking for his ankles. I was looking for his head.
Mhm.
Not that it would have said he had a head injury, but I just was trying to find the games where he was clearly injured, because what would happen is he was either in the box score or he wasn't, but it wouldn't say why.
Mhm.
And so when he stopped being in there for kickoff returns, that's where I was like, okay, well, he could have lost the kickoff return job, which he did. I found that in articles, but also could have been because he didn't play the entire game. So it was really hard to say. So I don't really know. I think I also don't know if he came to that camp in like the best shape or whatever. I mean, because if that summer he started using, drugs that are like obviously quite detrimental to your health, and like, I don't think you have to be a drug expert to know that heroin is not a performance enhancer. It's not a drug that people take to do better at sports. So you could see where that would be something that would cause him issues in preparation and conditioning and things like that, maybe. So I don't know. I don't have a good read on like what his injury history really was. I mean, you do have to consider when you're thinking about the head injury possibility, you do have to consider that, like you mentioned, he had played so much football. I mean, just really like on both sides of the ball and special teams for years. I mean, he just like, it seems like they're about an 8-year stretch of his career where he like didn't come off the field, from high school to the end of college. So that's a number of, shots and hits that maybe were adding up very quickly for him. It's hard to say. Again, this is kind of educated speculation. Was in a lot of the cases as good as I could do on this story.
Yeah.
But I think it makes sense though that would be an issue for him, especially coming from a black schools that wouldn't have the best equipment at that time, and not that the equipment at that time could do much for head injuries anyway. But no, I think I always felt like his potential brain injury, combined with drug issue, left his body like not ready for an NFL season, if that makes sense. I think that was
Yeah.
sort of the combo that did him in.
Yeah. Let's jump forward then, and let's talk about the 20th of October in 1972. The day that ended up actually being the day that Jim Duncan passed away. Now, you were mentioned in the podcast, and we won't go into too much detail about it, but around that time, he felt he was possibly being targeted for various reasons. Um, so, can you kind of run me through the sort of a brief timeline of what happened on that day?
Yeah. So basically, he took his mom to work. She worked at a liquor store. Um, I and then he like ran around, did some errands. Like he went to a gas station and asked for antifreeze for his car. He drove like a little yellow punch bug. Um, and then he went to a pawn shop, and I was in there like very briefly. Um, and then somehow he ends up in the police station. And according to the one witness that I spoke to, this guy George Lloyd, who was actually like only in his second week on the job there, um, he just walked in and they said, "Can I help you?" And he just walked across the like lobby, little foyer and entrance to the place, and just walked up to the guy and grabbed the gun and shot himself. And I mean, that's as much as we know. I mean, there's some there's speculation about different things that may have happened, and the biggest question for me was like, why was he even in there?
Mhm.
It seemed very weird that somebody would kill themselves or would die by suicide in a police station when I know that almost certain that he had access to a firearm. And a lot of people, that's a private thing that they do. It's not something that they always do publicly. Some people do it publicly. You never know. You don't want to
Mhm.
generalize about that, but um, yeah. So I mean, there just was it's a very weird story. I mean, it's the kind of story you hear that part of it right away. You're kind of like, that is unusual. Um, One side that could maybe, well, yeah, I mean, there's some theories of like why that could have happened, and then there's the alternate theory that it didn't happen that way, and that there was something different that happened, and it was sort of covered up or rearranged, like, so to speak.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and the officer's obviously gun that was in question. It's a bit weird because that you said yourself that it wouldn't normally be on show like it was that day, or claimed to be like it was that day, and it's normally put away. And the thing that I find crazy about listening to the events of the day itself as well was, like you're saying, he just walked in. He wasn't where, like, just as you would hear from other cases, or maybe other things that happened around at that time, a civil rights era. So when it comes to a person dying, it would normally be in police custody. But this guy just walked in just for absolutely no reason. He wasn't called there. He wasn't under arrest or anything like that. He just walked in of free will.
it didn't say anything. That's
Yeah.
like that. I thought that was really like eerie. So I mean, um, I never knew what to make of that. I mean, you have to part of this, you have to try to feel out if people are being truthful or um, kind of try to read people, which is difficult to do over the phone. Um, but I mean, I don't know, the way the guy told me the story was very, methodical. He rattled it right off, and so I mean, it kind of always kind of, this thing always came back to me is like the way you would look at it is really kind of revealing of just your general outlook. I mean, some people would look at this story and immediately think, "Wow, that's a sad story," but that's probably like exactly how it happened. And other people would look at it and just be like, "No, that's bullshit. Like, there's no way that's what happened." And so, that's sort of how I'm interested to hear what people think about it because I have kind of an inclination, or I have a leaning of which way I think it happened, but don't really know exactly.
Mhm.
So, um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and I think that's obviously the beauty of this podcast series, that everyone's going to listen to what you say, and they're going to come up with their own
mm,
idea of what happened and what they think happened to Jim that day. And like, especially other things where, so you spoke to his widow Alice, and she had stories about, she was told one thing and then another thing happened as well. Um, Straight, another thing that obviously aids itself to sort of conspiracy theorists is um, the police chief at the time was his name by Larry Lauer. He took over the investigation, which for a a police chief who oversees a shooting in his own precinct, to take over an investigation is not something you would normally see.
no, it. So there's a lot of stuff like that, that again, as a reporter or as the person listening, you have to sort of like suss out for yourself. And so how much of this is corruption or a cover up, and how much of it is a police department in a rural part of America in the 1970s that's really not very professionalized, um, and that it was just bad police work. So, and also, we think we're much more hyper attuned to the image of how things look these days, and like there was, I would say, in some ways, um, reaction against that back then. So like a lot of white people in power in the South, or really anywhere in the United States, didn't care how it looked. And so that's an important part of it as well, is that there may not have been anything sketchy that was done, but the aftermath of it was just so callous and like careless. And by careless, I mean uncaring. Um, is that, it lends itself to thinking like, wow, they really treated them badly afterwards. They treated the family badly. They left them. The reason I could even do this story 50 years later is because there's so many questions that aren't answered. So that in itself, like, you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? Was it because it was a cover up and they didn't want the questions answered, or is it because they just didn't give a shit? They didn't feel like they owe this black family any answers, or it's hard to say.
Yeah, but there was sort of pressure to do an inquest, and there was a public inquest done, but it seemed to be more of something that was done for show, to show that they actually did it, rather than trying to get to the bottom of what happened.
Yeah, and I just finished saying that they didn't really care what people, thought of them or whatever. But in this case, yeah, you're right. I mean, that was he said. Chandler said he only held the inquest because people were kind of in an uproar about it. I mean, they didn't even do an autopsy. It just was like a really sloppy, post-death situation. Like the investigation and how it's done was just, did not seem like it was intended to get to the bottom of anything. And the inquest itself, you guys still use inquests in Ireland, don't you?
We do, yeah.
Yeah. In the US, they got really, they went out of fashion because they're very, it can be very much a rubber stamp for the authorities. It's really, again, it's sort of run by Richard Chandler in this case, who runs a record service, that like hauls cars that have crashed and stuff. And so he's the guy that the police call when there's a wreck. So, I mean, he works very closely with these people. I mean, again, like, can you really expect him in a small town to be 100% objective? I mean, of course not. So, yeah, it's kind of absurd to even think that. So it's not surprising that the inquest ended the way it did. It's also not a well understood, I was going to say legal proceeding. I guess that's what it is, but it's not like a criminal thing or anything. Yeah, I mean, you really can't. It's kind of like the thing you get out of it is a suggestion. It has like no,
Yeah.
you don't have to follow it, or it has nobody goes to jail or anything. It's just sort of a suggestion. And so really that, it's kind of worthless.
Yeah, sort of like a public dissection of the supposed facts of what happened, but without coming to any sort of proper and conclusion that goes into the record books.
Right. Like a binding thing that has to happen. But in this case, I mean, you think if you wanted to do that, I mean, you would, nobody heard from Jim Duncan's side. I mean, not that, I don't know what they would have added really, but, I think they could have stood up and said, we don't think he did this because it's not who he is. And that would have been important to have that out there, I mean, I don't know. It just seemed weird that there was only one side that was talked to.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that no one obviously had the chance to speak their side, but like I said, there's not much that probably they could add because they weren't there on the day that it happened. And
right.
They could give possibly, like, what do they call it? Character references.
Like a testimonial for him. Right.
Yeah. And but the thing is, they say he wouldn't be the type of person to do something like this, but he wasn't the sort of person that people felt that they actually properly knew. And especially, I know you mentioned earlier with a little earlier on with the head injuries, but we've seen the development of CTE over the last 10-15 years, especially around NFL players. And if you look, obviously one example, and probably one of the most famous examples, is probably Mike Webster, former Steelers player. And there is obviously an argument to be made that CTE could have been one of the mitigating factors in Jim's passing.
For sure. And I think, here's one thing they could have done, and I checked on this, and I'm 99.9% certain they could have done this, is take the fingerprints off the gun. Because if his fingerprints were on there, that really highly increases the likelihood that, he was involved in his own death. If his fingerprints were not on there, then that eliminates
Yeah.
the suicide angle. And so the fact that something that simple that in 1972 you absolutely could do fingerprinting has been around since the early 20th century, since the early 1900s. And they sent stuff to SLED, which is the state law enforcement division in South Carolina. It's like South Carolina is like little state-run FBI. You know, it's their elite level of law enforcement. They had a lab that could absolutely do fingerprint testing if Lancaster didn't feel like it could have done it. So that right there, I think, would have really eliminated some things or like narrowed the focus, you know. And I think it's reasonable to assume that he took his own life because his head was in a really bad place. And I could even see where he went in there and was acting weird. And there was some sort of confrontation and he accidentally was killed, and, you know, they made it look like he killed himself. You know, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, but I mean, it's abundantly clear that he was not in a good place mentally. And that may have been something that more witnesses might have even said. You know, I mean, his assistant coach from high school told me that he knew that he was acting weird and that he was strung out on drugs. You know, so I mean, if that guy had gotten up, I don't know that he would have said that in public, but maybe he would have, and that again would have been more evidence, more objective evidence, you know, that something was going on with him. So I mean, just the way it was handled afterwards was either crooked or bad, in my view.
And you do hear in the podcast the family's views and what they think is the reason behind his death, which we won't get too into. We'll sort of have to, we won't ruin any sort of endings or anything like that for you. But also another thing that obviously should be considered is this is in the middle of the civil rights era in, you know, a town in the south of America. And the fact that there was still a thing, I believe that you mentioned in the podcast, that white people and black people actually couldn't even be in a couple together. And you know, you see a black successful man who played in the NFL in a small town. It's definitely something that can also be considered in Jim's passing.
Yeah, and so yeah, people can hear that conspiracy theory on the podcast, but like, remember, again, this is a guy that, you know, one of his first big purchases when he got drafted was a canary yellow Lincoln Mark III, which is about, I think, one of the biggest cars that has ever been made. I mean, it's an absolutely enormous car, often associated with pimps. You know, I mean, it's just like, it's a cool car and it's enormous, and he picked arguably the brightest color you could get. So I mean, he wasn't somebody that was coming back to Lancaster and just laying low. You know, he was around town. He was a social person. He loved women. He loved to party, I would say. I mean, definitely like hanging out. I mean, he spent a lot of his time in Lancaster shooting pool. So he's somebody that was out and about, you know, and not like laying low or, you know, exactly hiding his presence. So you could see where he could ruffle some feathers by having been out in the broader world, you know, experienced life, like we said, in Baltimore, where people tolerated him because of, you know, what he was able to do on the field. And, you know, maybe coming back to Lancaster and, you know, thumbing his nose a bit at the way things were, you know, justifiably, but not everybody would have been thrilled with that.
Yeah. And before I let you go, Bret, I want to ask one question. Now, there is one part of the podcast as well that you take the decision to go and confront a person. I won't say who, but you go to the decision to confront a person who hasn't been returning your calls, because you feel they're vital to the podcast. We won't get into the conversation that you had, but tell me, how did they react when they actually saw you?
Yeah, that was interesting because it was a 4-hour ride down there, a 5-hour meeting that I sat through, and then talked to them for about, I think it was like 8 minutes and like 40 seconds, and then a 4-hour ride back. And actually, I had I had a beer and a hamburger before I left because I was mentally a little bit shot.
At least you got something positive out of it. At least I hope the
At least
burger
I
and the
got
beer was
something.
good. Yeah.
It would have been, yeah, the beer was good. It would have been a very disappointing trip if I hadn't gotten something out of it. And the person was actually surprised me. Wasn't like really shocked, and actually was very calm about it. Which surprised me a little bit. And it was a bit nerve wracking, because you sit there for a long time during this meeting that the person was involved in. Just thinking about, okay, what's the first thing I'm going to say, or how aggressive do I need to be? Or I had no clue that the meeting would take 5 hours, so you're sitting there like, wow, this is really dragging on. So that was one of the more challenging parts of it as a reporter, but absolutely worth it to try to get, everybody's part of the story in.
Yeah. And again, like Return Man, it's a fantastic podcast. It's definitely a mystery that I don't know if we'll ever find the truth on or not, but listening to the podcast definitely goes some way of sort of giving you an idea of what happened. Brett did a fantastic job on the series. I was hooked from episode 1, and I think all the team that was involved should be really proud of what you did. It was great stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it took forever, and I was the only person covering sports at that newspaper I worked at. It was a little newspaper, and so I was just very proud that it got out. I want to thank Davin Coburn, who was the producer on it, and we had some other people that helped us too, that got laid off or had found new jobs in the middle of it, but all had contributed important parts to it. And so I'm thrilled that it came out finally, and I'm really happy to do anything like this. I makes me feel great that you listened to it and enjoyed it so much. And I'm would echo your encouragements to your listeners to check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, before we let you go, where can people find the podcast?
Yeah, anywhere you listen to podcasts. So it's on Apple or Spotify or the iHeartRadio app, and it's Return Man. It's part of the Long Shot series. So there's going to be some more shows in this series. I think of similar subject, but yeah, Return Man, 2 words, Apple or Spotify.
Excellent. And at the moment, are you still covering every sport for the one paper, or have you sort of focus maybe just on the 1 or 2 sports to keep you busy?
No, I've got a new job actually.
Oh, have you?
So that was a twist in the middle of the so in the middle of the 4 years that it took, I got a new job. So I work at Sports Business Journal, and I cover the business of sports. I actually cover facilities, ticketing, and fan experience. So I write about like stadiums and ticketing and what sports are going to be like in the COVID era.
Oh, fantastic. And if people want to follow you on Twitter or anything, where can they get you?
Yeah, at Bret just 1T, BRET number 1 JUST. All right, no, BRET JUST 1T. Yeah, sorry.
Excellent. No, it's no problem. I'm sure we'll be linked on our social pages anyway, so they can follow you there too. Again, Bret, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us today. And I look forward to sort of maybe any other work you might do in the future if you look and maybe getting your dipping your toes back in the podcast series market again.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I appreciate you guys listening in Ireland. I find that very cool. No Especially problem. As a McCormick.
Exactly. Well, that's one question I was going to ask him. I didn't want to be too stereotypical asking where the second name come from, but where did do you know what part of Ireland sort of comes from?
No clue.
No clue.
gotta do better homework. I'm not prepared.
Well, come on, Bret. I did my homework on the podcast. It's just a little give and take here. That's all we need. But
I know that I think it was something like we were McCormacks and got kicked out of Scotland for stealing or something and went to Ireland.
Okay.
But yeah, I wouldn't want to take that to the grave. I'm not sure about that.
Sure, it's definitely homework for the next time we have you on.
Yeah.
For sure. Guys, that's it for this special episode of the Under Center podcast. Please, if you can, make sure you go and listen to the Return Man podcast series. Just search Return Man and you will see it there. Obviously, like you were saying, part of the long shot series. So when you're done with that, there'll be more down the pipeline, I'm sure, which would be definitely worth listening to. If you were watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to us at the Dynamo Podcast Network. That's where you'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search there. We'll be there along with so many great other podcasts. But thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Stay safe and we will speak to you next time.